Welcome to Key Travels. My name is Amber Key, and normally I show you different places that you can see and do while you are in San Antonio. However, today I am in New Orleans. So I am going to show you what I plan on doing today in New Orleans. This is day 2. We arrived yesterday. And so if you haven't checked out that video, go check that video out. It should be posted. And today we have on our itinerary, we plan on going to the World War II Museum, and then we are going to go on a historic riverboat tour on the Queen Creole or Creole Queen. And then we're also going to look around the French Quarter area, the French Market, and Jackson Square and all that. So I am really looking forward to it. It should be a beautiful day. So come along with me as we explore New Orleans. So before we headed out, we wanted to grab some breakfast, and one of the best things about staying at Embassy Suites is the fact that their breakfast is included, and you can get made-to-order omelets. They have several different ingredients that you can get. Just let them know what you want, and they will make it for you. You can also get fried eggs here as well as scrambled eggs. Now, in addition to the eggs, they also have these potatoes right here. These are lightly seasoned potatoes with just like salt and pepper. And then they also today they had French toast sticks. Sometimes they have French toast sticks, sometimes they have pancakes, and then they have sausage as well. In addition, they have muffins that you can grab. I think these were blueberry, and some apples, as well as some cartons of milk. And then they had some yogurt out. I believe this was strawberry. In addition, they have some salsa and some extra cheese that you can have for your eggs. In addition, they had some oatmeal as well in this container right here. And they also had some hot syrup for your pancakes or your French toast. Now in this section over here, they had sliced bread, and they had some bagels as well as some English muffins that you could toast up in this toaster right here. And they either had coffee or hot water. Now they didn't have any flavorings for the coffee, but they did have some half and half and some sugar. And then they had some different packets of tea and hot chocolate packets as well for the hot water. Now as far as my omelet, I chose to get a ham and cheese omelet, which I did think was overcooked, but I would rather have an overcooked omelet than an undercooked omelet, and it was still kind of tasty. Now, after breakfast, we decided to walk over to the World War II Museum. The museum is just a couple blocks away from the hotel, so it was maybe about a 10-minute walk or so it wasn't too bad. It's located right in the warehouse district of New Orleans. Now, we did get to the World War II Museum a little bit early before opening, which gave us some time to walk around the exterior of the building, which was really nice because they do have different statues that I thought were amazing. The first statue I saw was of Roosevelt on a bench with this quote right here. And then if you look down at the bricks, you'll see that the bricks have dedications that are written on them. In addition, there was the statue of Anne Frank as well. Now, I would absolutely recommend that you take some time to walk around before you head inside the museum, just so you can see all of these different statues, because they are pretty amazing. There's this one here that is dedicated to war dogs that served in the military, as well as the handlers that took care of these dogs, because the dogs actually did play a major role in the war, as they still do today. But my favorite one was this one right here with all of these different soldiers. You'll notice that some of the soldiers are colored slightly different. They represent the soldiers that have passed away, that are still kind of there watching over their fellow comrades. And each statue represents a different soldier that was in the regiment for this artist, which I thought was absolutely beautiful. Now, when you walk in, you're going to see these planes that are overhead, that are suspended from the ceiling. And then there's also this train station that is kind of like a mock-up of what a train station is like. And so you can kind of get to see where your journey starts there. Much like the soldiers that went to war, your journey starts at this train station here. So you go inside of the train station, and then after you find your seat, you'll see that the seats are like made of wood, just in like a traditional old train. And then after you find your seat, this video plays on the screen that tells you a little bit about the journey of the men and how it started. Now, afterwards, we continue to look around the museum. There is this sign that tells you what you can expect to see on each one of the floors. So we decided that we wanted to start on the 3rd floor, which is where the observation deck is. So we took the elevator up and we headed onto the 3rd floor. So you got to see the airplane up close then. You really got a good look at the plane. And then you also got to see these motorcycles that were used during that time, which the first thing that came to my mind was, hey, that's the Cap's bike. That's Captain America's bike. So that's the first thing that came to my mind, as well as my husband's mind as well. And then you got a really good viewpoint of the museum. Now, they also have a special exhibit gallery that you can go through as well. And now this gallery does change from time to time. And today they had a bunch of different uniforms and photos that you could look at, which I always find really fascinating to look at the different photos and the letters from that time to kind of get a glimpse of what it was like then. Because, you know, most of us have only read about World War II in history books or learned about it from the different movies and everything that there are. So it is definitely kind of surreal to see everything in this way, with all of these different historic items. Now, my grandfather, like many others, fought in World War II. And unfortunately, my grandfather did die before I was born, so I never really got to talk to him. I never got to hear what his perspective was for during this time. Now, I remember my mom, she did tell me how my grandfather was drafted into the Army. Something that he actually was not very happy about, because he was not one of those people that wanted to be a soldier. He always said that his proudest thing was that he went in a private and he came out a private. And so he really was proud of that fact. Not that he wasn't given the opportunity for promotions. He was actually very highly decorated, and he earned a Purple Heart as well as several other medals. However, he turned down every single promotion that was offered to him because he did not want to be responsible for getting any other man home. And the higher position you are, the more men, the more soldiers that are underneath you that you are in charge of to make sure that they get home. And he said the only one that he wanted to make sure that he got home was himself. He did not want the burden of having the responsibility to make sure that anyone else got home other than himself. So whenever I go to a museum like this, you know, it's hard to say, oh, I had a lot of fun. It was so much fun to go to because, you know, World War II was a very serious matter. And it was a pretty dark time for the entire world. So you can't really say, oh, I had fun when you went to the museum. But it definitely was very moving and very powerful to go. And you know, I did learn a lot at this museum when I went. I also remembered some things that I had forgotten, some things that I didn't really remember so as well as I thought I did. And so it was nice to get that refresher because, you know, as they always say, you know, history repeats itself. And that is very true. History definitely has a tendency to repeat itself. So the best way to try to stop something like this from happening again is to learn from it and to remember it. And when you have all these different information and these artifacts and these news articles, then, you can't deny the history that happened, even though some people may try to deny it or to try to change, what happened. You really can't do that when you have it presented in front of you. And when you look back at that time, to see what America went up against, this is how large the army was for the Nazi army as well as Japan compared to America. We were significantly outnumbered. And to think that, we had that. And, it's like in this exhibit here, you have the house divided, which shows you how America felt about going to war. Not everyone was for this war. They actually had polls that they did to decide if we should go to war or not. And so, because not everyone was for it. Now, of course, the majority of Americans were for the war. So you had about 68% that said yes and about 24% that said no. So this museum didn't focus just on the Germany half of the World War II. It also talked a lot about Japan because, Japan with Hiroshima and everything definitely played a major part in the war and our part in the war as well. So there's this video that tells you all about Hiroshima, and then it tells you about how America responded to that war and what we did and how life was after that happened, because things changed drastically. And then there was even this one area that talked about women's role in the war as well, and how women helped out in the factories and kind of took over while the men were away, and how they kind of filled the positions that men did at the time before the war. Now these things still need to get done and things still need to get made, and women kind of took over and did it. And so that's what this section was about here, and how what women did. And it's quite amazing to see how much America changed because of World War II. Things definitely changed. Some good did come out of it, which is good, as far as women's equality and everything. So that did actually make a big difference. Now, of course, one of the major turning points in the war for us was definitely the Manhattan Project. And they have an entire section that is all about the Manhattan Project, how it formed, and what the process was for all of these men that were a part of the Manhattan Project, which of course there is a movie about the Manhattan Project, which you could go and watch. This shows you kind of what the room was like, where they would go and where they formed the idea of the Manhattan Project. And it has different plans for it. So you can kind of see they have the blackboard that they wrote on. Of course, you have the table of contents that you need for, the chemistry and everything. And so you can kind of get a glimpse of what it was like. There's pictures from back then and actual documents from back then. So that was pretty fascinating to see. Now, once we finished going through the Manhattan Project area, they had this one area that you walk into. It tells you about the different aircrafts and how to identify the different aircrafts, which I would not be able to tell you the different kinds of aircrafts at all. A plane is a plane and a gun is a gun. I have no difference. I cannot tell you the difference between any of them. But if you want to learn about that, they did tell you about what the difference were and how you could tell the difference between each one and identify each different aircraft as well as the different weapons as well. And then they also talked about segregation as well, because even though they did allow different men of color and everything and women of color to participate in the war, they definitely still had the segregation. So there was an entire section that talked about segregation for the military as well, and how the men and women of color during that time were treated. And so that was interesting to learn. You could see the suspicion and fear. This is talking about the Japanese people that lived in America during this time, because a lot of them were thought that they could possibly be, spies and everything. So you had that as well. And then here shows an example of what someone's dwelling house may have been like during that time. So, how things were furnished and decorated during this time. And which, I am a big architecture buff. I love going through old homes and stuff. So for me, this was definitely a highlight of the entire museum. I loved looking at all of the antique furnishings, and you can see the radio, which was a big part. That's how they didn't have TVs back then. So there was a radio in the living room. There's a radio in the kitchen. They had radios everywhere because they always were wanting to hear updates of the war. And so here is like an example of a kitchen, on how, their kitchen may have looked and what items may have been in their kitchen as well, and their stove, what it may have looked like. One of the things that I thought was really interesting were these different cookbooks that they had, because, they had rations that they were on. So they had cookbooks that would tell you about different items that you can make with the rations that you had. So I thought that was pretty fascinating to see, because even how, people cooked back then changed, because their food options were not the same because of the sugar rations and everything. So they had that, which, war affects every single home. And so that is definitely true. So it was interesting to see how that was and how that changed. You even they had told you how things were for like when you went to the movies, and how, there was different ads that they played before the movies, for the war, that talked about the war, and of course, talked about getting your, bonds and everything, and how it affected everything. It affected day-to-day life. It affected the magazines that you bought on the street. And these are different examples of what the magazines may have looked like during that time. So as I mentioned before, the World War II Museum is quite large. So if you wanted to come and visit the museum, I would definitely suggest that you allot anywhere from 3 to even 5 hours to look around the museum, because my husband and I, we probably spent a little over 3 hours here, and we did not stop to read all of the little, notes and everything that they have, and description they had about everything. We did not stop to read everything. So if you are one of those people that likes to read every single little thing that is posted, this will definitely take you quite some time to go through. So you will want to plan most of your day here, because there is so much for you to read and for you to learn about. There are so many artifacts and everything that they have for this time period. It is kind of overwhelming, everything that they had here. There is so much information about Germany, about Japan, about D-Day that you could learn about. And it was just a lot of information to take in. I did not, like I said, we did not read all of the little things, and it still took us about 3 hours or so to go through the whole entire museum. But again, it is definitely something that I would suggest that you do, because you definitely learn some fascinating information, like this dummy here that, you see in the parachute. I learned how they did these as decoys, and this is what they kind of look like, which you don't think that people would fall for that, but when it's being from afar, from a distance, people thought that they were actually real people, and they named this one Rupert, which I thought was pretty funny, that they named the dummy, parachute. But yeah, they used to do that a lot to help kind of aid to where they wouldn't give away their true position on where they were, look here, not there kind of situation. So that was very interesting to learn about. Now, I also loved how the museum had almost like these like life-size dioramas of different areas. So you kind of feel like you are like in the jungle in Japan or whatnot, and you can see what it was like, what it actually looked like, to kind of be there. And this shows you what like a plane crash may have looked like with the vehicle that was in there, amongst all of the trees and everything. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. And then you cross over this bridge to get you over to the other half of the building, because as I mentioned, this has multiple buildings. And so you cross over the bridge to get to the other side of the building, and there they have some more planes and everything suspended from the ceiling that you could look at. And again, they have plaques and everything that you can read. You can also pick up these dog tags here. Now these dog tags, you grab one of the cards and then you register it over at this computer screen. You go ahead and you register it, and then you will be assigned a person. And then there are different areas that you can go to kind of activate it, and it will tell you about that person throughout their time and what they were doing at this point in time in history. And then by the time of the end of your journey, you find out if that person survived World War II or if they unfortunately died during World War II. So after you cross over the bridge, you enter another building that is part of the museum. And of course, there is a aircraft that is suspended from the ceiling. And then you head down the hallway, and there are several different rooms in this building that you can explore. There's a video that tells you about, this time period of the war. And then there's also another room that kind of talks about the victims and those who died in the war. It tells you about how many victims were actually civilians, and several of them were children. And then it talks about how this is the deadliest war in human history to date. And it has different items from the people that lived during that time, both men and women, as well as children as well, and things that they may have owned in war during that time. And then there's an example of the headstone. So this headstone is for someone who was Jewish that died during that time, as well. It has the casket that their bodies were sent home in. And then you also have the regular standard headstone as well, which of course is the cross. And so you had these different headstones, and these are what the men who died in the military had. Now, of course, Anne Frank, who did not, read Anne Frank diary, the diary of Anne Frank when you were in school. So everyone knows about Anne Frank. And so they have a whole exhibit that shows you what life was like in the annex for Anne Frank and her family. And there are pictures everywhere that you can see, as well as this one right here, which is the most famous picture of her sitting at her desk, which her desk is right here, and while she wrote in her diary. And then it shows you what the rest of their living quarters may have looked like, what it looked like during that time, and which for the most part looked pretty normal. They even had a little kitchen area that had a little stove that they could use to cook food as well. It definitely was not as large as the typical kitchen that we saw before, but they definitely had a little bit of stuff. So this is what life for them was like in the annex during that time while they were in hiding. And then they tell you about what life was like in the Holocaust for a lot of people, which obviously was a horrible time in history for us. And then we see different pictures of soldiers. Once you walk out of that area, you see different soldiers, as well as the different medals that many of the soldiers came home with. Now, one thing that a lot of people do not think about when they think about the war, a lot of people think about the Holocaust and they think about all that, but they don't think about art. And, during this time, there was a huge raid on art. And so a lot of the Nazis would steal art from either owners, like Jewish people who owned these different paintings and everything, or from museums and things. They would steal it. And so there was actually a special unit in the army that got together so that they could actually uncover and find all of the art that was stolen by the Nazis. So I thought that was very fascinating to learn about, because it is something that, again, I heard a little bit about it from Indiana Jones and stuff, but it was nice to kind of read about it and learn about it in person. Then we went into another building. This was the Road to Berlin. So this was all about the Germany part of the war, and how Germany was kind of taking over Europe, and our part on how we played on, recapturing that and, helping out, and how we got together with other countries to band together against Nazi Germany. And then it had these diagrams, these life-size dioramas, which I really loved the life-size dioramas, because it really makes you feel like you are there. It is a great way to kind of see firsthand how things were. And this area talked all about the strategy that was behind the war and us living the war. And then there's this bunker, and you could see overhead it had the planes on what it looked like, during that time as planes were flying above. And you see, the pictures. So this is what it may have been like. And then you go through this jungle area. So I really thought that was really neat. It wasn't just a basic museum just with things hanging on a wall and everything. I thought that this museum does its best to kind of make you feel like you are there. You're not just looking at a bunch of stuff that is all over, and you're not looking at a bunch of artifacts and everything. They have it set up in a way like you are there. They have the surroundings that makes you feel like you are going back in time, and as though you are witnessing this firsthand. And I thought that was very entertaining. So I did really enjoy this. And through this part here, you could hear the different comms and the shouting on the radio, and you could hear the guns going off. And so it was definitely interesting. So yeah, it was really great. I did enjoy how it was more than just your typical museum, because so often when you go to a museum, it is just, walls with stuff. And this is more than just walls with stuff. And they had things presented in a way that were very interesting and made you want to learn more about it. And it made you want to be like, hey, what is that thing that I'm looking at right there? That's pretty interesting. Why is it like that? And so I really enjoyed that. I thought that was probably the best thing about this museum, and which probably makes it the top of it. Now, they also, in addition to the Berlin, they had the road to Tokyo. So this would tell you all about Tokyo. This shows you what a part of the sub, what it was like being under a sub. And this tells you about our allies that we had, everyone who kind of worked together against Japan and everything. So we got to learn a lot about that, which was really great. And on the Tokyo part, it's like you are walking through a ship. So you can see all of the interior. It definitely was like you were on a ship or a submarine and you were walking through it. And so that's how it was presented. So each building had its own theme, had its own feel for it, and each one was designed, each building is designed differently to help make you feel like you are in that section of that part in time in history. And so I thought that was really fascinating. There was a lot of different weapons and everything during that time to show you, because they didn't all just have the same basic gun. There was tons of different weapons that were used during that time, and you get to see that. There was different TV, shows that were up that showed you about what was going on and glimpses into what it was like during that time. So yeah, definitely, if you have a chance going to a World War II museum, you definitely should go. It was really fascinating. Like I said, it was more than just your typical stuff on walls kind of museum. They presented things in a very interesting way so that you don't get bored just walking around. You have something different to look at every single time, because honestly, it can get kind of repetitive. Look at a uniform, look at a gun, look at this, look at this letter, look at this. So it gets pretty repetitive, I think, typically when you walk through a museum and you see stuff like that. But how they have things presented here, I thought kept things very interesting. I really enjoyed how they had the different dioramas and how you could walk through it. I really thought that was great. But in addition to that, they did have the stuff. So they did have the medals, they did have the letters, they did have the uniforms that you could look at. And there was just so much stuff for you to look at. You could see the posters that they had during that time. And you got to see the toys and the electronics and how that was for during that time and that period. And you can see how things have grown so much. And so I thought that was really great to see. And you got to see all of the different aircrafts, because there were so many different aircrafts during that time period. And they had examples of every single one of them, and you could see them from each floor as they were suspended from the ceiling, and you got to see them really up close. You could go to that observation deck. Each building had the observation deck to where you could see the buildings from up top as well, and you could get also down on the ground. They had the vehicles, they had the medic vehicle, and they had the different tanks and everything, so you could get to see those up close as well. Then they also had this simulation of a sub that you could see that told you all about the Tang. So the Tang was a sub that actually there was a malfunction and it caused them to sink. However, they have this simulation that tells you about what it was like for them during that time.
Those ships we sunk yesterday were headed south and piled high with cargo. They must be gearing up for a big offensive in the Philippines.
Got the priority dispatch.
24 October, 2200 hours. Japanese supply convoy proceeding south along China coast. If we can disrupt the enemy supply lines, we can shorten the length of this war. Make your course due west for Turnabout Island in the Formosa Strait.
Aye, aye, Captain.
Men, our job is to intercept and destroy as many enemy ships as possible. We have 9 fish loaded in our torpedo tubes and 2 more waiting to be loaded. More than enough firepower to destroy this convoy. Chief of the boat, prepare to surface.
You heard the chief. Man, your station.
When they talk about fish, they're talking about the torpedoes. And push, turn, pull, whatever you're interested in.
All clear for.
All ahead standard.
Answering all ahead standard on 2.
All ahead.
So this is what the loading area of the torpedoes, or the fish as they called them, this is what that loading area looked like. Now we learned through the simulation that for the Tang, how they ended up dying was that there was actually a malfunction of one of the torpedoes that caused the sub to sink. Now, miraculously, there were actually 5 survivors from that sinking, which is unheard of today. Even now, if a sub goes down, everyone's pretty much going to die.
I'm the last living survivor of only 5 men ever in the world to have escaped successfully from a sunken submarine on their own.
Next up, we headed over to the other special exhibit that they had at the museum, which was all about Hitler's war on modern art. So as we learned earlier, Hitler was a lover of art, but he was a lover of traditional art. He was not a fan of modern art, because a lot of modern artists were also very politically minded, as well as the modern music as well. So for jazz music and swing music, Hitler did not agree with that. He did not like that. He did not like how it made the people feel rebellious. And he felt it gave them too much freedom. And he definitely wanted control over that. And so that is why Hitler did not like modern art. You know, a lot of the modern artists showed the truth on how life was during that time, and they showed prostitutes and everything. He did not like that. He did not like having that mirror shown in front of him about how the country was. He wanted people to think that Germany was a certain way when it wasn't. And so he wanted to get control over that. And so there's this timeline that shows you the different events for like the propaganda that happened during that time period, and how Hitler wanted to control the voice of the people, and he wanted to control that. Now, after that, going through that exhibit, we walked through the souvenir shop that was there, which was a pretty decent souvenir shop. They had toys and, of course, shirts and hats and everything. So it was they had really good options. Now, after the museum, we were a little hungry, so we decided to walk over to a place nearby called Willie Mae's. Now, this place is a James Beard Award winner, and they are known for their fried chicken. That is what they are known for. So we had to come in and we wanted to try some of their fried chicken. As you can see, they're starting to decorate for Mardi Gras here. They got some beads there. And the menu, they have a nice selection of cocktails and wine and beers. If you are interested in that, they do offer that. And then they have several different options for starters, as well as some salads, and then your entrees and your sides. That looks pretty good. The prices, I thought, were pretty medium. I wouldn't say this was inexpensive, but, you know, I've definitely have seen more expensive places. Some of the items, like the seafood platter, was $32. That was a little bit pricey. But for the most part, I would say that the prices were pretty decent. The dessert menu looked good. I really wanted to try all 3 of these, but you know your girl was going to get that strawberry shortcake beignet because I was on a mission for a beignet a day. And their sides looked pretty good. They had, you know, jambalaya, they had red beans and rice, and then they had several different options for your entrees. Now, for an appetizer, we decided to get the deviled egg. So this is called a chicken and an egg. And so what this is you get a piece of fried chicken on top of a deviled egg with some pepper jelly on there. Now, my husband thought that the pepper jelly was a little bit sweet. So he didn't care for, he thought it was really good, but he thought too much pepper jelly wasn't good. I thought it was delicious, however. But of course, you know, we had to get that fried chicken. We went with the white meat option, and then we got this mac and cheese. It was delicious. The chicken was crispy. But these beignets is where it's at. It was delicious. They weren't coated in the powdered sugar like Cafe du Monde, but they were still nice and flaky inside, and they were so good. I would definitely be back to order these again because they were so delicious. Now, after lunch, we were heading over to the Creole Queen Paddle Boat, which was part of our Ghost City Pass. So we got a Ghost City Pass for, I think it was a 2-day pass is what we got. We were able to do the World War II Museum. That was included. And then this Creole Queen Paddle Boat ride was included as well. Now, the Creole Queen, this was to take us to the battlefield that happened for the New Orleans. And during your ride, it is narrated. So there's a person that is on the over speakers, and they tell you about the Mississippi River, give you a little bit of history. They tell you about the battlefield and what you're about to experience. And then you get to see along the river everything that is there. Something that surprised me is that you still saw some destruction from Hurricane Katrina, because, you know, that happened quite a bit ago now. And to see that there is still some destruction from that was a little bit surprising to me. Like the sugar factory, you can see all these broken windows and everything. You would think that this is not operational, but it was. It was still in operation. They just kind of worked around the windows being broke. I guess they didn't care that all these windows were broke. I don't know. Now, as you can see, was plenty of seating on the Creole Queen. We sat kind of towards the back area, and it had these tables with these chairs, because there was also a bar that was on the boat, as well as a restaurant that you could go and get some food at as well. The food was not included in our ticket price for this. However, you could go get it. There is also a dinner cruise option that you could get that doesn't take you to the battlefield. But for the Ghost City Pass, it is the battlefield that is included. And you get on that at like 2 o'clock. It's about a 2-hour tour altogether. I'd say it took a little over 30 minutes to arrive here. And then over in the front here, there's some bench seating on the top. Now, this is the top deck right here. And then, so we had to go down the stairs in order to get to the dock area for us to get off of the boat. Definitely make sure you hold on to the railings as you are going down, as it is a little rocky. And then, as you can see, the boat is 3 levels. So you have a mid-level, that's where the bar is, and then down below, that is where the restaurant is. Now, once we got off the boat, you can meet up with a park ranger that's there. However, we were a little late getting off the boat, so we ended up catching up with him a little bit later. And in the meantime, we kind of walked the grounds a little bit. We wanted to read about what this beautiful house was. And so there are different signs that you can read on your own, so you can kind of learn this. So you can either, when you get off the boat, you can either meet up with that park ranger and walk along with him, or you can just kind of walk the grounds on your own and explore on your own and read things at your own pace if you want. So you really have that option on either way that you would like to do this. But we wanted to catch up to that park ranger and see what he had to say.
It did not snow when this battle took place here. There was sleet and hail. It was said it was one of the wettest and coldest winters on record. Torrential downpours, sleet and hail, a lot of fog at night and the early mornings. Sugarcane was the predominant crop that these plantations all along the river grew, but they had harvested it in November, a month earlier, before the campaign began. And it was cut to about a knee-high stubble. There's a lot of things that happened during this 6 weeks, and there are several engagements. and we don't really have time to go into it. Like I said, there was a movie called The Buccaneer, singular, The Buccaneer, filmed in 1959. It's a good representation of what took place here, but it's not entirely accurate. But in this battle, they're going to lose about 60% of their regiment. On January 8th, thick fog covers this field. The cane fields have been harvested to knee-high stubble, but in the early morning in all this fog, you couldn't see more than 20 yards in front of you. The British forward batteries are approximately a half mile across this field. It's going to take them a little while to march in the fog to try and break this defensive line. They're going to try and turn the flanks, the river flank and the swamp flank. If one of those fail, Jackson would probably have to retreat. Early in the morning in this fog, you could hear drums rolling out, barking out orders, fifes barking out orders, eerily sounding bagpipes in the fog. And then when the march began, the ground began to shake as 7,000 seasoned British troops began the march across this field here. When it was over, the British are going to count over 2,000 casualties. That's not all killed, but 85 officers, 3 major generals fall on this field. One of them was their overall leader, Pakenham. He receives a mortal wound. General Samuel Gibbs, leading troops along the edge of the swamp, also mortal wound. General John Keane, who led the expeditionary force here, is taken out of action with a very serious wound. But about roughly 85 officers and 300 of their best troops were killed in action in the first 40 minutes of the battle. Many, many more are going to suffer horrific wounds from artillery and small arms. There was no penicillin at this time. A lot of these guys aren't going to make it home. But many of them that do are going to be dealing with Napoleon's forces at Waterloo about 6 months later. Now, it was a big victory for the United States.
So after we listened to the park ranger for a little bit, we had some extra time to look around a little bit further. So there is a visitor center that you can go inside. Definitely do not skip this. You want to go inside the visitor center. They have also next to it there is a monument that you can take a look at as well. We were not able to go inside the monument at this time, but we were able to get a good look at the monument before we headed inside the visitor center. Now the visitor center, in addition to having a little area where you can buy some souvenirs and everything, is also kind of like a museum. So there's a video that tells you about the battle, and then it also has a little bit more information. It is not huge, so it only takes, maybe about 10-15 minutes to go through, but they have a map here. It tells you all about the importance of the war, things that led up to this war that caused it to happen and why it was so important, and then the events that happened during the war. Plus there was a lot of artifacts during that time, and it showed what New Orleans' part in the war was and how this was. So if you didn't have the park ranger to tell you about all of this information and you're walking this on your own, you definitely want to make sure you stop by here so that you can get that information to learn about the battle and to see how this was. So I thought that this was really interesting. It was definitely a surprise. I wasn't expecting to walk into this kind of museum at the visitor center. I was expecting the visitor center just to be like a desk that had some pamphlets and everything. But they actually had a lot of information about the battle. So I thought that that was really nice. So make sure you take some time to read about this. Of course, they had a section with Lafayette, pirate or patriot, because he definitely was a pirate. But, he and his men were a big reason on why we won that war. They had a big part of it. And so we definitely owe a lot to Lafayette and his men, because without them, they definitely would not have won this battle. Of course, you had the leadership of Andrew Jackson as well, which was a huge turning point for the battle. And winning New Orleans and getting control of New Orleans was extremely important. So you get to learn all about that here, which was fantastic. Now, once we finished walking around there, we headed back to the boat, which was just in time because the whistle did go off on us to let us know, hey, get back on the boat now. But we got a good look at the boat here. You can see the paddle wheel in the back there, which was really neat because this is not run by electricity at all. It is ran by that paddle boat alone. So that was really nice to see. Definitely kind of like a throwback to another time. And then we got to see the beautiful Mississippi River on our way back. So that was really splendid. I did pick up a pamphlet that I was able to take home, and I was able to read on my way back. Again, just a little bit more information about the battle, because I didn't know anything about this battle before I came here. I knew nothing about this. This was not something I learned about in school at all. So for me, this was really fascinating to learn because I did not know about this part in history. And you can pick this pamphlet up over at that visitor center. And then we headed on back to where we started off, which again was maybe about a 30-minute ride back. As you can see, there's the other paddle boat there. So it was a really nice, I definitely enjoyed it. You can see the streetcar. So afterwards, the trolley pickup is right there at the river center. We headed over to the French Market district. Went to the French Market. Unfortunately, it was already starting to close. It was like 5 p.m. at this time, and it was already closed. We walked past the Vampire Cafe, which I thought was really neat. And then we decided to walk around since we weren't able to go through the French Market since it had closed. We walked around the French Quarter a little bit. And we got to see, it wasn't crazy. Of course, this was January, so I didn't think it was going to get too crazy. It was a weekday. But we were able to kind of walk around a little bit and get a feel for the French Market. Well, not the French Market, but the French Quarter. So we were able to do that. So that was really nice. Some of the shops were open, so we were able to go inside and take a look around. But one of the things that I absolutely loved was all of the music that was here. Now, we decided to head back to our hotel and get some of the happy hour. They had like chips and salsa and some vegetables. And then, of course, you're able to get your drink as well. I decided to get a rum punch because they give you those drink coupons. I got a rum punch, and it was absolutely delicious. So definitely, if you're at Embassy Suites, get a rum punch.
So that is a wrap on day 2 in New Orleans. We had such a great time. I gotta say, the World War II Museum, can't say I had fun there, but it was a very powerful experience. It was so phenomenal. I did enjoy it. The place is huge. Willie Mae's chicken, so good. So if you are in New Orleans, definitely take time to stop by Willie Mae's and have some of that chicken. It was so crispy and delicious. And then we went on the Queen Creole, which was, again, fantastic. I enjoyed the ride. And walking around the battlefield, honestly, I gotta say, I didn't know much about the Battle of New Orleans and like its importance to this country and everything. And so it was really cool to go and experience that and walk around and listen to the park ranger talk about it and everything. But overall, we did a lot of walking throughout New Orleans. Definitely got our steps in yesterday, and your girl is tired, so I'm about to go hit the bed and go to sleep. Good night, everybody, and I will catch you tomorrow for day 3. And if you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. And remember, I am the key to your best vacation.